In the UK, where high street retailers John Lewis and Boots have just announced 5,300 job cuts. Boots is laying off 4,000 jobs, while John Lewis is closing 8 stores, with 1,300 jobs likely to go. Many are still concerned that the new economic support from Chancellor Rishi Sunak will not be enough to stop millions of workers losing their jobs. With us on the Global Business Report is the senior economist at the UK Institute of Directors, Mr. Tej Parikh, to discuss the Chancellor's statement and other related issues. Good morning to you. How is the how are businesses in the UK reacting to this the program? The question many are asking is, will this be enough as we continue to hear about more job cuts like Boots and John Lewis? And are we likely to see another emergency budget by autumn or before that?
Yes, well, the main measure the Chancellor announced was a bonus to give to business leaders if they retain their staff. It was a £1,000 bonus. Unfortunately, this may not be enough for a number of firms to keep their staff on board. We have a job retention scheme at the moment, which is keeping many people furloughed, and a lot of businesses are now trying to return those staff, but they're experiencing high costs. And it may not be enough. As you said, we've already seen a lot of redundancies. And I think there was need for more support in the announcements in the middle of the week. And many might not be able to wait for another budget event in the autumn.
Thank you for that. I believe we're going to take a listen now to a section of Rishi Sunak's speech.
We have taken decisive action to protect our economy. But people are anxious about losing their job, about unemployment rising. We're not just going to accept this. People need to know we will do all we can to give everyone the opportunity of good and secure work. People need to know that although hardship lies ahead, no one will be left without hope. So today we act with a plan for jobs.
All right. So, Mr. Parikh, I also want to add to this now. They're calling this Rishinomics. How is his approach, different from previous chancellors?
Well, I mean, for Rishi Sunak, the biggest difference is that he's had to deal with a major pandemic, which obviously hasn't been the case for previous chancellors. So I think, one of the things that the UK government has been focusing on in our Treasury has been making sure that we support jobs as being the main priority, because we had record low unemployment rates before the pandemic. And so there's been a vast number of packages and reliefs that have been given to businesses over the course of the pandemic. I think what is different in these times is that there needs to be a number of different packages at different times. So we had the first package during the main bits of the pandemic. The midweek announcement was about kind of supporting jobs. And then we will expect, I suppose, another announcement in the coming months, particularly in the autumn, around how do we actually kind of recover and grow out of this kind of pandemic as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Now, with all these packages, there's of course going to be question about the mounting debt, right? So like the Institute for Fiscal Studies says the deficit could hit £350 billion following these spending measures. Should folks be worried about the mounting debt? Are you worried as well?
Well, I think at the moment the government is judging that because interest rates are low, then the borrowing for them, the borrowing cost for them is relatively low as well, and therefore they feel like it's okay to be spending large amounts of money and reducing taxation. I think the other side to look at that is, whilst it might be right in terms of lending conditions for them, it's important that actually, in order to kind of reduce the overall debt burden on the economy, you also need the economy to grow. So I think what the government is judging that is that we need to try and accelerate ourselves out of this recovery first before we start thinking about trying to kind of cut back on our spending and perhaps increasing taxes, which the Chancellor did hint at would be in the pipeline, perhaps in budgets in the years ahead.
Thank you for that. I want to move to another issue that many are where you are concerned with, and that's Brexit. What are your thoughts on progress, well, if we call it that, that's been made in striking a deal with the EU before the end of the year?
I think there is hope that both sides could reach a compromise. There are some big issues in the technicalities of the trade deal that are kind of still being worked through. But there's a chance that there could be some type of slim, toned down deal in December that then leaves other parts of the more kind of substantive elements of the trade deal to be sorted after that date. I think the concern for businesses that is the probability that a no-deal Brexit has increased. And, we're just coming out of the pandemic, so to speak, and now there's a lot of uncertainty with what happens at the end of December. So for businesses, they won't know until the 11th hour, and I think that's the concern for them.
So can businesses perhaps plan for a no-deal Brexit? Is that perhaps the best option they have as of right now, instead of, waiting in limbo?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, planning for a no-deal Brexit could mean any number of things. And right now, businesses are still trying to manage their cash flow difficulties and repair their balance sheets coming out of the pandemic. I mean, we're not out of the pandemic by any means. And I think a number of firms, particularly SMEs in the UK, will find it very difficult just to kind of manage existing risks, let alone thinking ahead in 4 or 5 months' time about what they need to do for their business in terms of no-deal Brexit. But many of them might be thinking about how can I reduce my supply chain risks? How can I kind of mitigate against potential tariffs? But these will be very hard questions to answer for a number of firms who are also having to weigh up, what exactly will be the situation globally with the pandemic, just the time Brexit is supposed to take place.
All right, thank you for that. Still on the question of trade, what are the chances that the UK can get a comprehensive deal with the United States or Japan ahead of exiting from the EU?
Well, in terms of the US trade deal, there's a number of issues around taxing tech firms, agriculture, which remain sticking points. And I suppose there's also the wider issue on time frame, also in trying to push through a trade deal before the US elections later on in the year. The Japan trade talks seem to be a bit further ahead, but I think nonetheless, with both trade deals, a lot of it remains kind of interlinked and entrenched with what really happens between the UK and EU, not just in terms of the finer details, but also in terms of the bandwidth for the government to even kind of negotiate several trade deals at the same time whilst they're trying to, negotiate Brexit as well.
Thank you for that. I wanted to touch on housing and some of the other measures that have been put forward, just to get your take on whether or not, if you're satisfied, these measures are enough. So there's a mortgage payment holiday, a temporary ban on repossessions, and then, of course, the interest rates cuts by the Bank of England, which should drive down the cost of housing. How far do you think those measures will go with regards to what has been taken so far?
Well, I mean, alongside those, there were measures announced in the middle of the week, for example, reducing kind of the stamp duty burden, which is essentially a tax when you purchase a property. And that was kind of seen as a boost to encourage people to go out and actually kind of, look at moving house and potentially accelerating spending there. Alongside those other measures, which are more kind of temporary measures to support households and deal with mortgage payments. I think many are hoping that we could go a bit further, support renters perhaps as well, as alongside people with mortgages. And much of it comes down to the ability of banks to really kind of provide forbearance to lenders. And I think there's going to be need for ongoing support from the Bank of England to the banking system to ensure that banks can offer the kind of relief and forbearance to mortgage lenders throughout the kind of coming months ahead.
All right. And as far as those measures, just one more question for you. There were some more measures that were taken with regards to VAT cuts for the hospitality sector. I believe the VAT was cut for 6 months from 20% to 5%. And there was a 50% price cut on meals at participating restaurants between Monday to Wednesday in August. Now, the hospitality sector celebrated this, but Helen Dixon, who is the CEO of the British Retail Consortium, was complaining that those cuts weren't extended over to retail, and according to her, they employ more people than hospitalities. What do you think of what she said? Do you share in that?
I think there is a concern because many of the measures the Chancellor announced were to try and stimulate consumer confidence in spending. So he cut VAT. There was also a voucher scheme to encourage people to go out to restaurants, and they'd get a discount for that over the month of August. The challenge with trying to stimulate consumer spending at a time like this is the one thing that's holding consumers back from going out in the first place is fear around coronavirus itself. And so there is a question mark as to how much these measures would actually boost flow into kind of hospitality sector or even the retail sector through the voucher scheme, particularly because social distancing remains in place. So I think the retail sector is probably right to feel a little bit disappointed there wasn't other specific measures targeted for them, particularly because a lot of businesses in that sector need help managing their cash flow.
Fantastic. And I think I was watching an interview where you mentioned Brexit vouchers. Does that work the same way as the others? How would those work?
So the proposal for Brexit vouchers was essentially last year when we were all expecting a formal kind of trade deal to be announced or Brexit to actually take place. There was preparation vouchers, which allows SMEs and businesses to kind of get the professional and legal advice that they might need to kind of mitigate and manage the risks in advance of Brexit taking place. So the vouchers would give firms a discount to that advice. I guess in the coming months ahead, as we see preparedness for Brexit being an important issue, that might be something that I think the government needs to consider.
All right. Well, Mr. Tej Parikh, the senior economist at the Institute of Directors, I want to thank you very much for taking us through your thoughts on this £30 billion pledge from Rishi Sunak to assist businesses and, of course, all the concerns that go along with it from the housing sector, retail, and everywhere else in the UK. Thank you so much for your time, sir.